Hey, Rob here for R&B Reviews, and Halloween is just around the corner, so I'm going to be continuing doing reviews of horror movies, and if you've missed any of them, feel free to go back and check them out. We did one for Fright Night, Return of the Vampire, and recently Dave and I did one for Shadow of the Vampire. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be reviewing the Hollywood Legends of Horror box set that was put out by Warner Brothers. It's a DVD box set that contains the horror films that were made by MGM and Warner Brothers during the 1930s. And back in the early 30s, Universal seemed to be holding a monopoly on horror films. They made the best, and once successful films like Dracula and Frankenstein came about, all the other studios tried to grab a hand at it, including Paramount, who made a 1931 version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde with Frederick March, and naturally MGM and Warner Brothers tried to cash in on it, even though honestly they weren't quite as good as the Universal pictures. And honestly, I think MGM were better at making sophisticated comedies and dramas and musicals, and Warner Bros. Was better at making gangster pictures and musicals as well. But they did try their hand at them, and they're released here. And I decided, instead of reviewing all 6 films, because each DVD contains 2 films, instead of reviewing all 6 of them in one video, I decided I'm going to split them up and do them DVD by DVD. And I'm going to start with Mark of the Vampire with Bela Lugosi and The Mask of Fu Macnhu with Boris Karloff, 2 1930s horror icons. So, okay, so let's go ahead and start with the first film, Mark of the Vampire. Now, it's a remake of the legendary Lost silent film, London After Midnight, which had Lon Chaney Sr. in his famous vampire makeup with the huge teeth and piercing eyes. In this film, it's about a man who is found murdered in his own home with tiny hole wounds in his neck, and everybody believes that it is the work of a local mythical vampire called Count Mora and his vampire daughter Luna. And an expert on vampires and the occult is brought in when it is believed that the victim's daughter is next. Now, the film, as I mentioned, is a remake of London After Midnight, and obviously I have never seen this film because it is a lost film, meaning it's, that it doesn't exist anymore. Print doesn't exist anymore, and a negative doesn't exist anymore. But I did see a reconstruction of that film on Turner Classic Movies once with where they used surviving still photographs, and I got to see it, and I gotta say, the story for that film is probably the most ridiculous, outrageous, and unconvincing thing I ever saw. And this film, I think, is just a little bit better, but you just can't really take it too seriously. The location is moved from London to what is now the Czech Republic in this film. And the good things about the movie is that the photography was done by the great James Wong Howe, and it contains some very eerie, moody ones, and since it was done by MGM, the film benefits from these great, large, detailed sets. And another plus is that the film is less stagey than the previous collaboration between Bela Lugosi and the film's director, Todd Browning, which was Dracula. There were fluid camera movements in this film, and the film runs at a rather quick yet rushed pace, where Dracula was a little bit slowly paced. Mark also benefits from the acting, especially Donald Meek, who plays the nervous doctor in the film. Now, when I first saw the film a couple of years ago, I felt kind of let down by it, and I felt that stuff was missing, and I noticed that some characters kind of disappear halfway through the film. And having rewatched it now, I like this film maybe a little bit more than I did beforehand, but it is kind of a letdown. For example, I found Lionel Barrymore's vampire hunter character to be a little bit over the top, and I found him a little bit too bossy, and I found him to be, I don't know, I just got tired of him calling everybody who makes a mistake in this movie fools. It just got so tiring after a while. And I also, one thing I noticed is there's a lot of different things being thrown at me at once. I felt like there's 2 separate attacks, one on the leading man of the film and one on the leading woman, played by Elizabeth Allen. And then there's the butler and the maid. They think they see the vampire in the house, and it just seemed like all of this was happening like almost at once, like within minutes of each other in the film. I also kind of got tired of seeing Count Mora just showing up practically everywhere in this movie. And when the inspector and another character visits an abandoned castle, there is Count Mora, the daughter, there's a zombie vampire of the victim that got murdered or had the found things in his neck. And then there's this 4th vampire that shows up, and we don't know anything about him. He just shows up and he kind of does nothing. And the film I read was originally 75 to 80 minutes, and it was cut down to the current length of 60 minutes. And I guess a lot of the stuff that got cut out was mostly because of censorship reason. Like the stuff that I've read that got cut included, I understand that there was an incest relationship between Count Mora and his daughter before he ended up killing himself, as well as some additional comedy relief material. So all that probably got chopped out because of censorship. Mark of the Vampire is not a perfect film. It does have its flaws, but I think it's moody, atmospheric, and there is a clever ending that you won't see coming, but I do believe people will probably be disappointed with it. But I think it is definitely worth a look. Next is The Mask of Fu Manchu, starring Boris Karloff, which I think is more of an interesting, strange, bizarre, and campy adventure film than a horror picture. I kind of think they threw it in here just because Boris Karloff was in it. But I mean, in a nutshell, the plot is Fu Manchu's quest is to find the sword and mask of Genghis Khan, which is out near the Gobi Desert. But meanwhile, some British archaeologists are also planning on trying to find the tomb of Genghis Khan, and when those two meet up, things do not go pretty well. Now, in the early 30s, the Fu Manchu pictures were made by Paramount in the early 30s, and with Warner Orland as Fu Manchu. But for some reason, the fourth film was made by MGM with Karloff in the part. I don't know why, but Karloff, as usual, he's always good, and no matter what he does, I think he's excellent here with his menacing smile that he gives. Like he has something cooked up in his brain, in his head every time something comes up. He always has a backup plan. But what caught my attention with the film was the good use of having a mobile camera that moved very swiftly. And I mean, a lot can be done by doing that instead of cutting to close-up shots of multiple characters back and forth. Considering this was 1932 when the film came out, it was definitely a good technique. But what might catch modern viewers' attention is because the film was made before the very strict film censorship took over in the mid-30s, there's a lot of drug references. There's some sexual stuff, such as when Manchu's daughter is turned on when a man is being whipped, or when she is offered to an archaeologist in exchange for information on the tomb of Genghis Khan. And on top of that, there are some racist comments about Asians as well as white people, so I guess they both can be offended together. I think MGM was trying to capitalize on a lot of Universal Pictures stuff. Like here, there's lab equipment that kind of reminded me of the equipment that was used in Frankenstein. And like another Karloff 1932 film, The Mummy, both have characters trying to have him play a character that is after something that the British museums are also after. But we get a very strong female lead here from Karen Morley as Sheila, who insists on going on these expeditions to try to go to the tomb. And even though she is warned of the dangers, and when she wants to give the sword and the mask to Fu Manchu in order to free her kidnapped father. I think this movie is an acquired taste for some people, but of these two, I enjoyed this one the most. So that's my review of the first disc of the Hollywood Legends of Horror set, Mark of the Vampire and the Mask of Fu Manchu. I think they're pretty interesting films to check out. So thank you very much for watching. Hopefully I'll be able to get to the other ones. And of course, feel free to leave any comments. Leave your comments about if you've seen either of these films or about the video. I do greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.